Chapter 11, The Posse. "I'm home," Murph called out, still in fine spirits as he let himself into the ugly new house. But even its ugly newness wasn't getting to him today. He threw his bag down in the hall and wandered around looking for someone to share his mood with. He thought he could hear his mum's voice coming from the kitchen, and as he got closer, he realized she was on the phone. "I just want some kind of guarantee that you're going to be able to keep me on after next summer is all," he heard her say. Murph's spirit dropped at least 5 notches on the spirit scale. It's out of 10, by the way, and had been nudging a good 7. He hated these conversations and recognized them immediately. It was an, I want to make absolutely sure we're not going to have to move house again sort of conversation, and he'd become depressingly familiar with them over the last 3 years. He was also familiar with his mum's various acting techniques as she tried to disguise what was going on and make everything seem okay. Sadly, in terms of acting ability, she was about as natural as AstroTurf. "But I thought things were going well." She cut herself off as she noticed Murph hovering in the kitchen doorway like a novice ghost. Look, we'll talk more next week. Just please do what you can. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Ben. Bye." She put the phone down and ushered Murph in for a hug. "That was work, right?" said Murph. "Didn't sound great." "We'll sort it," his mum reassured him. Murph suddenly remembered what Flora had said to him, and it felt appropriate to repeat it. "These things have a way of coming out in the wash." "I suppose they do," she sighed, and hugged him tighter. Despite these encouraging words, Murph's spirit scale didn't get beyond a wobbly 5 that evening. He decided to cheer himself up with a pre-bedtime treat and some alone time, so he wandered out of the house towards the small parade of shops nearby. It was getting late now, and they were mostly closed. Murph squinted up into the chilly, sleety drizzle that had begun to fall, and stuffed his hands deeper into his pockets. He was just about to make a dash for the warm, inviting windows of the one shop that was open, Mickey's News, when something caught his eye from the triangular patch of grass over the road. It was a tiny, winking green light, and he'd seen it before. As you may have noticed, Murph is an inquisitive thing. Mysterious green lights, unexpected popping sounds, strangely colored liquids, or birds with the power of speech. None of these things will go uninvestigated if Murph's around. So he casually crossed the road, leaving the circle of streetlight to move cautiously onto the damp grass and pick his way between some pale, unimpressive trees. The tiny, bright light was beaming from a bench near a bus stop on the main road. There were 2 people sitting on it, chatting to each other in low voices. Murph watched as a green shaft of light lit up the girl's pocket. She slapped her hand to it instantly and pulled out a phone. "Posse receiving," she said. Murph slowly realized who they were. It was the pair who directed him to Mr. Superman's office, Deborah, the tall girl with the dark hair, and beside her, Dirk, the cool-looking boy in the blazer. Posse receiving, thought Murph. It was an odd way to answer your phone. What on earth was wrong with the standard hello? But the girl had started speaking again. "Cowgirl active. El Bandido active. Ready to respond, over." Deborah was plugging a wireless earpiece into her ear with her other hand. She listened intently, then nodded. "Accepted. Posse active and responding. Let's move." The last 2 words were directed at Dirk, and without a second's hesitation, they both got up from the bench and sprinted away, the spray from their shoes making a mist behind them on the wet street. Without thinking, Murph darted across the road after them. Whatever was going on, he wanted a look at it. 30 seconds later, and he'd have been flattened by a bus, but luckily for him, this isn't that sort of story. The pair were already well ahead of him, but Murph put on a burst of speed and was just in time to see them take a right into a side road. Murph cranked his pace up as far as it would go. Like a cheetah with its back legs on fire, he pelted towards the turning, and by a nanosecond, he was in time to catch a glimpse of their silhouetted figures going right again into an alleyway some distance down the narrow road. By now, Murph's lungs felt as though they'd been pumped full of hot sand. He leaned against the lamppost on the corner of the side street, heart twanging like a demented ukulele, and concentrated on doing some really high-quality panting for 20 full seconds. When Murph regained the use of his legs, he walked cautiously down the road. There were strange noises coming from the alley. There was a clang as if a bin had been knocked over, followed by shouted words that he couldn't quite make out. Suddenly, someone came dashing out of the alley. It was a man, and he was running as fast as he could. Murph was too shocked to do anything. He gazed open-mouthed as the man bore down on him, legs pumping like pistons. He was carrying an expensive-looking leather handbag in one hand, which, though lovely, didn't quite blend with the trainer's jeans and blue t-shirt he was wearing. If he hadn't stolen the bag, it would have been a crime against fashion. As he had, in fact, stolen the bag, it was just a crime. Behind the thief, Murph saw the silhouette of Deborah Lamington as she stepped out into the street, holding something large and round. "Stop him!" she yelled. Startled, Murph glanced behind him to see who she was talking to. By the time he looked back, the man was upon him. He bundled Murph roughly out of the way, knocking him into the wet road between two parked cars. Murph heard his running footsteps recede down the street. Then there was another dustbin-like clang, and everything fell silent. Exhausted, bruised, and scared, Murph had just made the decision to lie in the nice, comfortable, oily puddle he'd discovered for a bit longer when someone spoke to him. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I think so," said Murph, slightly embarrassed that he'd chickened out, then been bowled over like an ineffectual skittle. Deborah, or Cowgirl, as she seemed to call herself in this kind of situation, had appeared in the gap between the cars. She held out her hand to haul him up. "Who's this?" said another voice. It was Dirk. He'd arrived seemingly out of nowhere, very quickly, much to Murph's surprise. "It's that kid from school, the one we directed to Superman," replied Cowgirl. She turned back to Murph. "You could have at least tried to give me an assist. Or are you one of Mr. Drench's lot, the hiders?" Started Murph, brushing the front of his jeans casually, as if that would help remove the litre of oily water that had soaked into the back of them. "Hang on, I know who it is," said the boy suddenly. "It's that first year. The one with no cape. Kid." "Normal. Yeah," said Murph gloomily. "I'm Debs," said Deborah Lamington. "Cowgirl when I'm operational." "Right," hedged Murph. "And El Bandido, right?" "How did you know his code name?" asked Deborah. "Did one of the older kids at school tell you? Or did you hear me on the Halo unit?" "The, Halo unit, yeah, right." "Well, we'd better call this one in," continued Deborah/Debs/Cowgirl. She produced the smooth black handset again and spoke into it. "Posse transmitting. Suspect neutralized. Repeat that. En route now. Understood, well clear." She turned to Dirk. "We've got law on the way. Better secure Mr. Mugger over there." She jerked her head up the road, and, with a jolt, Murph saw the man who'd been running away, lying unconscious on the pavement. He trailed after the other two as they headed towards the dark shape on the ground. As he got closer, he spotted an old-fashioned metal dustbin lid on the floor beside the man's head. Deborah picked it up, spun on her heel in just about the coolest way you can imagine, and threw it back down the road like a frisbee. It skimmed above the cars, turned an elegant corner, and disappeared into the alleyway, where there was a loud badoing noise followed by clattering. It was the exact sound a metal dustbin lid makes when it comes to rest on top of a metal dustbin. Pop outside and have a go if you want to know what it sounds like, and you have really retro bins. Deborah then produced a length of rope that had been wound around her waist like a belt, and flicked it towards the unconscious man. It seemed to animate itself like a snake, tying his hands and feet securely together. Murph was beginning to think that Deborah Lamington was kind of awesome. She picked up the smart handbag and handed it to El Bandido, raising her eyebrows. "I'm on it," he declared, before following this up with a comedy bit of Mexican-style mouth trumpets. Deborah rolled her eyes as he started to run down the road, blurred, and vanished. "Whoa," marveled Murph. "He's got the same cape as Mr. Flash, only faster." "Don't let Flash hear you say that," warned Deborah. "Now, you get out of here. I gotta deal with these people." Blue lights were reflecting off her face as a police car pulled up. "And listen," she continued, "don't follow us again, okay? This isn't a game, and it certainly isn't safe for someone like you." Murph's stomach felt like it had hit the floor and rolled around in something stinky. For a minute there, he'd almost been able to kid himself that he was on a mission with a pair of real superheroes. But Deborah's words had made the reality of it clear. He'd creepily followed them, been too cowardly to help when they needed it, and now he was being told to clear off. Without another word, Murph turned and wandered away down the street. As he reached the corner, he looked back to see Deborah showing some kind of identity card in a leather wallet to two police officers. "Refer it to Camus," he overheard her saying, but he was too miserable to wonder what that meant, or to stay and find out. Murph spent a few days kicking himself for not sticking a foot out and tripping up the mugger. But it's never a good idea to spend too long kicking yourself. You just get a sore bottom and end up falling over. In the end, he decided that even if he had tripped him up, it wouldn't have done much good. What was he expecting? It wasn't as if the pair were suddenly going to ask him to join their crime-fighting gang, which seemed to be called the Posse. What was he going to be, alongside Cowgirl and El Bandido? The amazing Trip Boy? Captain Ankle? But the sight of two real-life heroes in action had got him itching to find out more about the Alliance, even if it meant resorting to extreme measures like speaking to Mr. Flash. "Sir," began Murph towards the end of a CT lesson a few days later. A gangly kid from the front row had just been demonstrating his cape the ability to communicate with cats. But the cats that the caretaker had brought in on a trolley hadn't seemed especially interested. Eventually, it had just curled up and gone to sleep. "Yes, Kid Normal," replied Mr. Flash, never missing an opportunity to rub Murph's nose in his own nickname. "How do you join the Heroes Alliance?" he asked boldly. "Nothing you ever need to worry about, Cooper," said Mr. Flash dismissively. But the question had got the rest of the class excited. "Oh, come on, sir, please. Yes, tell us about becoming a hero," begged Hilda from the other side of the room. "Nobody calls them heroes anymore, horsey," snapped Mr. Flash. But his eyes glinted. Murph realized he'd hit on a subject Mr. Flash loved talking about. "Well, the Heroes Alliance, as I explained to most of you in your first week here, is an organization that 99% of you will never be asked to join. It was originally formed over 30 years ago to combat..." He stopped himself briefly, then continued. "Well, you don't need to know exactly why it was formed, but these days it coordinates the activities of a small number of secret operatives who assist our normal law enforcement agencies when needed. Alliance operatives are highly trained, highly skilled, and their activities are kept top secret. So you can forget any silly ideas you might have got from comics about flying about town in plain sight or wearing some oddball costume." Hilda looked a little crestfallen. "But I thought heroes used to wear costumes," she said in a small voice. Mr. Flash flashed over to her desk and loomed above her like a bald cloud. "They used to wear costumes? Of course they used to, back in the day, before any interfering Herbert with a video camera could blow your whole secret identity in seconds, and don't even get me started on the blimmin' internet." He whooshed back to his desk and continued muttering something angry-sounding about twits and face pages. "They must have been great days, I bet, eh, Mr. Flash?" asked Mary, glancing across and smiling at Murph. If they played this right, the rest of the lesson could easily be taken up with the teacher's reminiscences. "Indeed they were, Perkins," said Mr. Flash, going a bit dewy-eyed at the thought. "Proper heroes, with proper costumes, sidekicks, you name it. Even you might have stood a chance back in the day with your little yellow umbrella." He looked at her almost sentimentally, but Mary bristled. "What's wrong with my umbrella?" "What's wrong with it? You can't fly without it. That's what's wrong with it. Maddest thing I've seen in 30 years teaching here." Murph looked across at Mary with interest. He'd always assumed her umbrella was just part of her unique fashion sense. She was blushing. "Well, it's not my fault I can't skim without it." Mr. Flash made a dismissive, snorting noise. "Wouldn't be much good on a real mission, though, would you?" he taunted. "What happens if you lost your brolly, eh? You'd be as much use as a solar-powered owl." Murph decided to try and get the conversation back to what Mr. Flash had referred to as the Golden Age, to save Mary any further embarrassment. Tell us about some of the old heroes then, sir, he prompted him. Oh, yes, please, Mr. Flash, pleaded Hilda. Tell us about a hero from this town. None of the really cool heroes would have come from this town, countered Charlie, the eye heat beams boy. They'll all have operated out of the big cities. This town? This town? This town is one of the most famous in the whole annals of capability, spluttered Mr. Flash, who seemed as insulted as if Charlie had made an unkind comment about the size of his mother's bottom. This town was rumoured to be the home base of the most celebrated and mysterious hero of them all, I'll have you know. The whole class was now desperate to know more. Who was that, sir? Tell us about him. Please tell us, Mr. Flash. Please. All right, said Mr. Flash, seating himself in the internationally recognized teacher storytelling pose, standing half upright with his military-trousered behind braced against his desk. He proceeded to tell them a story about the most powerful and most mysterious of all the heroes of the Golden Age, a figure not seen for more than 30 years, who disappeared into the shadows as suddenly as they had once appeared.